Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. There's been a tripartite summit between the Israeli, the Russian, and American national security advisors in Jerusalem. Obviously, a huge win for Israel itself to be hosting such a tripartite summit to begin with, but obviously the topic seemingly that obviously was spoken about the most between these three national security advisors was Iran, and specifically Iran's role in Syria, as well as Israeli actions and operations when it comes to Syria. The Israelis, of course, saying that they've attacked Syria over 100 times. That's according to Netanyahu's own admission. And all of this to prevent Iranian influence in Syria and Iranian weaponry from going into the hands of Hezbollah and others. Of course, Israel concerned about Iranian presence close to the Golan Heights as well. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by Mona Alami, who is a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. She's joining us now from Beirut in Lebanon. We're also joined by Kourosh Shamlou, who is an international lawyer and managing partner at Shamlou Law. He's joining us now from the French capital, Paris. Kourosh and Mona, thank you both for joining us. Kourosh, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What do you make of this tripartite summit as it took place? And of course, then all of this talk about the Iranian role in Syria and that concern that Israel has.
What can I say is, as you just said, it's a big win for Benjamin Netanyahu and for Israel, because Israel keeps attacking Syria, and Syria doesn't have the right to defend itself. And even if the American or the Russian help Syria, Israel says they shouldn't, because we are the only one who have the right to attack other countries, especially Syria. And we just don't understand how can Israel be so afraid of Iran, and they just keep bombing Syria. Syria is a sovereign country, and even the national security of Russia told Israel that they should respect other countries' sovereignty.
Yeah. Mona, I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that Israel has legitimate concerns about the Iranian presence, especially close to the Golan Heights?
Yeah, I do think Israel has legitimate concerns. Regarding Syria's sovereignty, I do agree Syria is a sovereign state. However, Syria has been marred in a war for the past nearly 8 years. I think Turkey has invaded Syria. Americans are occupying and have positions in northeastern Syria. So I don't think the sovereignty of Syria. Russian forces are with Syria's agreement, Syrian's regime agreement deployed in Syria. So I think in terms of sovereignty, a lot of people have infringed on that sovereignty. However, regarding Israel, I think there is a tacit agreement. There is not just tacit, there is an open agreement between Russia and Israel regarding curbing Iran's presence in Syria. Israel sees Iran on several of its borders. First of all, Israel perceives the presence of Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese party in Lebanon, and which has fought the Israeli occupation for very many long years, as a threat to its northern border. So Hezbollah's presence on the border in Syria, on the Golan border, represents another threat for it, definitely, because it fears that in any war, for example, between Iran and America, it could pay the price of this war, even if it's not directly involved. Iran has made a policy on expanding regionally in various countries. We've seen that in Yemen by beefing up proxies. We've seen that in Iraq with many of the Hashd al-Shabi, with part of the Hashd, not all of the Hashd al-Shabi, because I disagree with the people who say that the Hashd al-Shabi is the creation of Iran. It is not, but a large faction of the Hashd al-Shabi, or the PMU, the Popular Mobilization Units, are pro-Iranian. And now you have Syrian forces that are pro-Iranian, that have been trained by Hezbollah and Iran, as well as Iranian troops and Hezbollah on the direct border with Israel.
Okay, so then, Kourosh, as Mona put out very well, Kourosh, Mona laid out the many regions in which Iranian influence exists. And if you do see the map, then certainly for the Israelis, that is a legitimate concern, isn't it?
I don't think it's a legitimate reason. Iran is expanding politically and militarily, maybe. So why should Iran just stay there? Iran is surrounded by American forces in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So why shouldn't the Iranian have the right to defend themselves? So if Israel has the right to be threatened or not, I think not, because Israel has the atomic bomb, has nuclear weapons, and they're scared of a country that still doesn't have anything. So how can you be scared of a country that doesn't have nuclear capacity, where you have, and on the same side you have nuclear capacity, and you can destroy any country around you if you're willing to do that. So I think Israel is just, Israel is adopting the American or the Western point of view. Americans, when they went to Iraq, they attacked Iraq, and they said it's for the Iraqi people, for defending American. Europeans do the same also. They attack on the other countries, Libya or other countries, and they say it's for the sake of the Libyan people or for defending Europe. Israel adopt the same position. They attack other countries, they threaten other countries, and they say it's to defend themselves. So that's why I don't agree with Israeli threats.
Mona, do you think that there is a legitimate point to be made, an authentic point to be made about the fact that possibly this entire issue of Iran being used as this very convenient boogeyman by Israel continuously when it comes to any issue in the region? Do you think that that's gone a bit too far? Because not everything can be blamed on Iran, can it?
Look, I do agree that Iran is a big power. It's a historical power, and it does feel that it's encircled in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and it is going to retaliate. It is true. It's understandable.
Yeah.
I do also think that Iran is also the boogeyman of the region. However, in terms of the countries that we're talking about, whether it's Iraq, Syria, or Lebanon, definitely Iran has played a destabilizing role. Iran's role is very Iran's strategy is very smart and is very long-term. Iran doesn't go and invade a country like America has done in 2003 of Iraq, and under fake or wrongful justification. But Iran builds a core militant factions that is loyal to it. And when it does that, it destabilizes the country because, first of all, if we take the example of Lebanon, it has built Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Lebanese force, but Iran now is very influential over Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is integrated to the Lebanese government. And Hezbollah is the only party that has weapons outside of the government, which makes the state building effort very difficult. So it's a very pernicious...
If I may come in for a moment on that point, Mona, because I think it's an important you made. The other side's argument, obviously, Mona, would be then that Israel, the only problem that Israel really has with Hezbollah specifically is, of course, the fact that it stands up for the Palestinian cause. Is that enough of a reason to then again go after Iran? Is it Iran's fault that Hezbollah, as an Arab political party, as well as you said, a military force on its own, stands up for Palestinians?
Look, no one is arguing the righteousness of fighting for the Palestinian cause. However, I do think that Palestinians need to fight for the Palestinian cause, and I do worry when non-state armed actors in various countries do the bidding of a foreign country. In Lebanon, I don't think it's acceptable. I do think that the weapons of Hezbollah need to be the issue of the weapons of Hezbollah needs to be solved in a very integrative approach. I do not think that Hezbollah should be given up like that for the sake of Israel. I do think that Hezbollah has been able to protect Lebanon for a very long time, but I do think that existence of the Hezbollah on the long term destabilizes any future for strengthening the state. And this is the same for Iraq, and it's the same for Syria. Any militant group that is doing the bidding of Iran and that coexists with the state will hinder the state building effort, whether it's in Syria or whether it's in Iraq. So yes, this is why I worry about Iran's influence in the region.
Okay, so Kourosh, give me the response on that then, because do you think that Iranian influence / even, it can be argued, intervention in countries, be it Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, has been a detrimental thing for all of the above?
I don't think, look, Iran, let's say, Iraq has been occupied by ISIS for many years. Iran one of the rare countries that went to war on the land against Daesh, and even Hezbollah came and helped the Iranian or helped the Iraqi military or the Iraqi militias to fight ISIS. On one point, Mona is right that say Hezbollah is a militia within Lebanon and they have the right to have arms and or to keep weapons. But let's say if Hezbollah wasn't there, Hezbollah was the only militia who defended Lebanon when it was occupied, and you see you have the same position. Hezbollah was fighting for Lebanon. You can go back during the World War II.
So then, Kourosh, if I may come in, why not fight under the guise of the Lebanese army itself? Why create a separate group within Lebanon?
Because what I think, I'm not sure, but what I think it's because the Lebanese government is going to listen more to the Americans or to the Europeans than to the Iranians, because they see their interest with America or Europe, and by way of consequence, as what Israel said, because what you can see since Donald Trump took power, he just listens to every single word that Benjamin Netanyahu tells him to do. So he said by a tweet, he sent a tweet asking Donald Trump to accept Golan annexion, and Donald Trump accepted. He sent by a tweet asking Donald Trump to put the Iran Revolutionary Guard on the terrorist list. He listened to it. But then,
Kourosh, if I may argue on that point, just before I go to Mona, the argument from those would be, listen, Iranian influence is spreading too fast. Iranian intervention in countries is spreading too fast. It's not just about America or Israel, is it?
It's been like that since the beginning of the war. America tried to have influence everywhere. Europe and England, when they were superpowers, they tried to have influence around them and in other countries. So why shouldn't Iran has the same right? Iran has been a like a regional power for centuries, and now they wanted to expand their strength. Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? Only some countries are allowed to do that? No, I don't agree with that. I think they have the right to try to expand, but just not do anything bad, but they have the right to expand.
Okay, so Mona, I wanted to bring you in, and for a moment, back to that tripartite summit that took place in Jerusalem. And I wanted to ask you about the Russian point of view here, Mona, because, on the outside, the Russian National Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev said, any attempts to link Tehran and to make it seem like it's a threat to global security would be wrong. To put it in the same basket as ISIS or otherwise is unacceptable. But then at the same time, there are reports, Mona, coming out that behind the scenes, Russia does agree with Israel to an extent about Iranian influence, specifically, of course, when it comes to Syria. Do you think almost that Russia plays a double game when it comes to Iran?
Yeah, please, before I take this point, sure. It was mentioned before that Hezbollah doesn't trust the Lebanese government. Hezbollah is in the Lebanese government. It has several ministers in the Lebanese government. Yeah. No appointment is made in the army or any security forces that does not have Hezbollah approval. That is out of the question. All major foreign policy and defense and security decisions cannot be made without Hezbollah's approval. And we've seen that in many occasions where Lebanon puts itself in very difficult conditions with other Arab countries because it sided with Syria and Iran. The latest is definitely the economic summit that took place in Lebanon, and it created a lot of problems because Lebanon insisted on Syria being invited to the summit. So to go back to Russian double policy, I do agree Russia has a double policy. Russia, first of all, it has strategic interest in Iran, and these interests for now do converge with that of Iran's. Iran has the manpower, has deployed manpower on the ground, whereas Russia has managed the skies of Syria. So basically, it does need Iran to keep on playing a role in Syria, and it's a very important role. However, at the same time, Russia does see that it might, on the long run, its interest in Syria might diverge. Iran generally does not, we've seen that in Iraq and in Lebanon, does not perceive the state-building effort in a very good way. Generally, Iran likes to create a force that exists parallel to the states or the government's forces that it can keep on controlling at its whim. And I don't think Russia does believe in a state-building effort in Syria. So eventually there will be a clash in the various interests. But I'm saying that on the long term. For now, the priority of Russia is to stabilize Syria with Iran's help. So it will not go in a clash with Iran. However, it will contain Iran by allowing Israeli targeting Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. So it's playing a very pragmatic role. I do believe that on the the international scene, Russia's priority is still, to fight the Western bloc, the Western, if you will, the Western encirclement of Russian areas or states that are close to Russia.
And on that point, then, Mona, if you allow me, I wanted to just go for a short break and continue that conversation. In fact, on that point you just made there about Russia's interest and why it would be siding with Iran, at least publicly at this time. Is it just about the United States encountering it? We'll be back, viewers, right after this break, continuing the conversation on this topic. All right, so just before the break, viewers, Mona made a very good point about why Russia may be siding with Iran when it comes to Syria and otherwise, really. What are its interests vis-a-vis Iran, and why would it be wanting to side with Iran? Is it just about countering, as Mona had clearly pointed out, the encirclement of Russia, really, by NATO and other Western forces? Let me bring that point then to Kourosh, because Kourosh, do you think that even looking at the history of Russia-Iran relations, do you think Russia can be trusted when it comes to the Iranian point of view, or do you think that Russia will at some point in time flip completely on Iran?
I think looking at the history, I think Russia will flip on Iran anytime its interest will be in play. Russia, we can say, almost betrayed Iran many times in Iran's history, and at this time they're siding with Iran in Syria because they want to have some power in the Middle East, because they don't have much more power everywhere. As you said, they're surrounded by NATO in Europe everywhere, so they want to have an influence, and they're playing Iran against the rest of the world just to have some power and to get some power for themselves. And at any time, if Americans or the Europeans agree to side with Russia, they can flip on Iran and leave Iran. Let's say they're not gonna go to war, or they're not gonna die for Iranians. Even if the United States attack Iran, Russia wouldn't do anything.
Okay, so then, Mona, then at this point, when we're talking about Russian influence, we can obviously talk about also when it comes to Syria and reconstruction efforts, because that seems to be one area where there will be competition of some sorts, won't there, when it comes to Iran and Russia. How big a factor do you think that is, and is that something that's going to come out very soon, do you think?
Yeah, I do think there's a competition. We've seen that a lot of the projects, such as the phosphate and the airport, have been given. The priority has been given to Russian interest. However, I do believe that the reconstruction effort is not going to happen on a high scale. I don't think neither Iran, neither Russia has the capability to rebuild Syria in the current economic situations they are facing, especially Iran. And we've seen that there are several laws that are being passed in the United States, such as an amendments to the Caesar law, that basically bans any reconstruction effort in Syria and targets any international company investing in Syria. So I do not see a large reconstruction effort in Syria as long as these sanctions target companies that are willing to work either in the reconstruction or in the oil business.
Okay, so Kourosh, one aspect which was interesting as I was doing research for this show is that the Russians have made a statement, and made a number of statements, in fact, recently especially, that tensions need to be calmed between Israel and Iran. Now, does that mean, do you think, Kourosh, that Russia is actually trying to play a mediation role of some sort between the Israelis and the Iranians? Because there's even talk that possibly this National Security Secretary of Russia will be traveling to Iran at some point. Will he be carrying a message of sorts, do you think, from Israel, which is reconciliatory in some way for the Iranians?
I'm not sure if he's gonna be carrying any message, but I think Russia tries to play a major role. They wanna be back in the international scene, and they wanna try to be able to mediate. As of now, it's more Japan and the Sultan of Oman that is trying to mediate behind the doors with the Americans, but Russia wants to come in and try to play a major part as a mediation and as a big country. And I agree with what Mona said about the reconstruction. I think the reconstruction of Syria is going to be hard because Americans, when they cannot go to a country or have this country for themselves, they pass sanctions, they pass laws that will sanction any other country or any other companies that want to invest in that country. They do the same in Iran. You know, as soon as America pulled out the JCPOA, all European countries went out of Iran. So it's going to be the same with Syria. So Russia is trying to play a major role as a mediator, as a superpower back again in the scene, but it's not going to be that easy.
Mona, do you think that Russia can play a major role? Can it, in fact, calm tensions? Does it even have the power to do so when it comes to Israel and Iran, who don't even have diplomatic relations?
Yeah, it can play. It can play a mediating role. Russia is a superpower, and as it was told, it wants to play a very important regional role, and it feels that it can now because of American, if you want, retreat from the region. We see that America is pulling away from the region on the longer run, and Russia has a new area that it can attempt to play an important role. However, I don't know. I feel that the Russian will keep on playing, both sides, more than trying to mediate. I think the Israel are going to keep on working with Israeli and trying to contain Iran and Syria by working with the Israeli. I think that's the modus vivendi for now in Syria. And I even think that in case there's an escalation between America and Iran, I do think that Russia has imposed red lines on the Iranians in Syria. And I don't think they would allow them to basically retaliate on American interest in Syria.
That's an interesting point. What do you make of those red lines? Because yes, those have been spoken about, haven't they, Kourosh? That Russia has essentially told the Iranians in many places that, listen, these are your red lines. Do not cross these, either when it comes to Israel or America, American interests, I should say, pardon me, in the region. Do you think Iran would respect those red lines if there were to be any further escalation in the region against it?
I think so. Iranians and the Iranian government is smart enough not to cross those red lines, and I think they don't even need for other countries to tell them what the red lines will be. They know that they shouldn't attack any American interest or any American citizen or any American anything in that region. When they shot that drone, that spy drone that were over Iran. There was another plane with many Americans inside, another spy plane, and Iran could have shot that other plane. They didn't do so because they knew if they do so, Americans will go directly to war against Iran. And one other thing that America is not trying to pull off is about the shipping, protection of the shipping. As Donald Trump tweeted recently, he said the Strait of Hormuz is not of any American interest anymore. America doesn't import any oil, almost like less than 15% oil from there. And he's been asking, why should America protect the Strait of Hormuz, whereas China import 91% of its oil and Japan 62% and almost all the European countries the same. So I think Iran knows the red line, and they're not gonna cross it unless, of course, unless it's a total war, and then nobody can predict what's going to happen.
Nevertheless, Mona, the Iranians sent a very clear message, haven't they, to the United States and even to the region and beyond when it shot down that U.S. drone. Because, as Kourosh there mentioned, there was a P-8 plane with 35 military members on board as well, which was essentially flying very close to that U.S. spy drone as well. What do you think that message is, and do you think it has been received even in Tel Aviv?
I think it's been received by the Americans because they pulled out of retaliating of striking Iran.
Yeah.
However, look, I think that generally Iran's policy is to make covert war. This was the only open move it did. Covert war for Iran is it's an inexpensive policy because, first of all, and when I talk about covert war, I talk about the mysterious bombings of the oil tankers in the Straits that could not be directly linked. Investigations showed either or, but there's much debate to it. They could not be linked directly to Iran, as well as the attacks on American interests in Iraq that were also not claimed by any faction. So I think that these are low-cost war that allow Iran to not be directly involved, to scare its enemy, and at the same time to show also the enemy's fragility, because I think that President Trump pulled out from retaliating because it knows that it has troops in Iraq, it has troops in the Gulf, it had troops in Syria, and that any direct attack on Iran will draw, retaliation from allies of Iran in the region, probably not even directly from Iran. So it's kind of a ghost war that is in the favor of Iran, and it's a low-cost war for Iran. Whereas with America, it would maybe lead to an escalation, unneeded escalation with unintended consequences.
Okay, so Kourosh, what's interesting about those oil tanker attacks is that I was just reading that the UAE, in a meeting with the Russians, the UAE foreign minister, I should say, meeting with Sergei Lavrov of Russia, he said that that there's no proof or there's no evidence that Iran was behind the oil tanker attacks. That's a significant step down, isn't it, Kourosh, from the hyper sensitivity in the region over Iran being behind those oil tanker attacks before even an investigation was carried out. Do you think that even now regional countries are realizing that they need to tone down the tensions in this region?
I think it's a huge step down because at the beginning when these ships were bombed or attacked by mine, everyone said it's Iran. Americans said it's Iran. All Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Israel said it's Iran, and nobody could prove it. And at the same time, when these tankers were bombed, Japanese Prime Minister was in Iran negotiating on behalf of the American, trying to de-escalate the tensions between Iran and the United States. So why should the Iranians go and bomb these ships in order to provoke a war? I don't think the Iranians did that. But I think personally, I think it was more of a sabotage thing. We don't know who did that.
To be fair to Kourosh, because it be argued, as Mona there said, that the Iranians would want to send a message to the region and the world, wouldn't they? They would want to send a message that, listen, stop messing with us. We will react in some way or not. We are a superpower.
Exactly, they can do that. But for the ship, I'm almost sure they didn't do that. But they want to show the world that they are a superpower. They're not gonna bend over any American obligation or any American orders that tell them what to do. They're never gonna accept that. They never accepted it before. They lived under sanctions for 40 years. And still, they could have shot a drone out of Iran's airspace, a U.S.-American drone. So Iran is a superpower, even if it doesn't have the best military equipment as does Saudi Arabia or other countries. Iran, if there's an attack or if there's anything going on against any Iranian interest, Iranian will retaliate by their proxy, by the rebels in Hindu, by Hezbollah in South Lebanon and in Syria and, of course, in Iraq.
Okay, so Mona, if we're looking at what now has happened after the downing of the U.S. drone and all these tensions that escalated, especially with U.S. forces, being brought into the region in higher numbers, do you think that the division within the Trump administration over what to do next with Iran is becoming that much more obvious? Because, during this meeting in Jerusalem, John Bolton was just as rhetorical and anti-Iran as he always is, warning Iran over and over again about its activities. But then we also have Donald Trump and Pompeo sometimes giving very reconciliatory statements towards Iran, saying that they want talks with Iran. They want peace with Iran. They respect Iran as a country, etc., as a nation. Do you think that there is a division between the Trump administration and then who will win out, do you think, at the end of the day?
Look, there are two things that are important in this equation. First of all, yes, there is the division between and within the Trump administration. We've seen that when they were thinking of attacking Iran, there was a division between the Pentagon, the head of the CIA, and Bolton were for an attack, whereas the Pentagon was very much against because it's on the ground and it knows the reality and the cost of such an attack would bring on troops that are deployed in the region. Yeah. However, I also think that President Trump is a very mercurial figure. President Trump is someone who is playing a game of, suffering a stance and suddenly going, escalating, which I think is a bit destabilizes its opponent. And I think it's a policy that has paid off so far. What worries me, however, on the longer run is that I think that so far I'm not sure President Trump knows what it wants, if it has a clear foreign policy towards Iran. We've seen that the policy towards Iran has been mostly economic, increasing sanction by the day to really weaken Iran and maybe create a backlash, an internal backlash. But I'm not sure it has another policy, and I do think that President Trump does not want a war in Iran, despite all the statements he has made. So it's a dangerous game that's going on.
Do you think that, Mona, if I may, do you think that they're then in such a confused mixed messages that are coming out of the Trump administration, do you think that there is a lot of room then for a major mistake to occur by either side and then for us to be in a full-blown war?
Yeah, this is why I'm telling you, because there is so much uncertainty. Uncertainty can generate mistakes, which could trigger a full-blown war. However, I do think that both Iran and America do not want a war. So I'm really not sure where this is going to lead us. But definitely, as uncertainty grows, room for mistakes and miscalculations in the region are definitely going to happen.
Kourosh, do you think that the Iranians as well need to tone it down? Do you think that they will be looking to calm tensions in the region, or do you think that at this point in time they are war ready?
No, I think that they're gonna try to turn it down. Iranians don't want war either, as the Americans. I mean, more to say, as Donald Trump. I'm gonna just come back on this point. During an interview, President Donald Trump said that John Bolton is a great guy, is a great national security advisor. He voted and he wanted the war in Iraq, and the President Donald Trump didn't want that war, and he said it was a mistake. History showed that the invasion of Iraq was a mistake. And he said, at the end of the day, it's Donald Trump who takes the decision. So that's why he pulled off the retaliation against Iran. And the night they just wanted to go to war in that situation room, as they have it in the U.S. They call it situation room. President Trump was there, John Bolton, National Security Advisor, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, and Gina Haspel, the Director of the CIA. All of these three people said that we should go to war. But in that National Security Advisor, there were no Secretary of Defense, because the day before, Patrick Shanahan, the Secretary of Defense, resigned, and later on, Donald Trump named the Secretary of Army to be the Secretary of Defense. So the Pentagon didn't want to go to war, and I'm sure Donald Trump, he always said, I don't want to go to war. I don't want to send the boys there. I don't want to put boots on the ground. So I think at the end of the day, both want to talk, want to renegotiate, but Iranian wants to say they're strong enough to be able to counter American pressure and counter American attack and sit at the table on their terms, and American will say the same.
Very well. We'll leave that as our final word, but of course, appreciate both Mona and Kourosh for their time and, of course, expert insight. Putting that all into context for us viewers, we got through, of course, a lot, but going back to the original topic of the discussion, that tripartite summit between the national security advisors of Israel, America, and Russia meeting in Jerusalem, the Russian the Russian National Secretary, for his part, warning the Israelis that, listen, don't keep blaming Iran or don't keep comparing Iran to the likes of ISIS and calling it a major global security threat, et cetera, et cetera. That is not an authentic claim, according to the Russians. The Israelis, of course, and Americans on the polar opposite side when it comes to Iran, at least publicly when it comes to Russia as well. But then obviously there's a lot of other factors when it comes to Syria and the situation there. There's the Golan Heights. There's the competition essentially between the Russians and the Iranians over reconstruction possibly, or other such influence within the country. And then there's, as Mona pointed out correctly, Lebanon, Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. The list is endless really of Iranian influence in the region, whether intentional or unintentional. And then obviously then there is this huge issue of a looming war, a possible war, of course, the downing of the U.S. drone, the calling off of the U.S. strike on Iran. What does all of this mean? What will the coming days bring forth? It is certainly significant that the UAE foreign minister has toned down the blame towards Iran, saying that there is no evidence that Iran was behind the oil tanker attacks. We'll wait and see, though, what that means in the coming days. I'll be back, though, after a short break with our next segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the UK royal family's spending habits and how that may be rubbing some Britons the wrong way. If we're talking about numbers, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle have spent about £2.4 million recently of taxpayers' money on their new home. Prince Charles currently has a private estate worth more than £1 billion. And of course, the pro-royal claim is that they bring in a lot more money than is spent on them when it comes to tourism. But the anti-royal claim, or the Republican claim, I should say, is that the royals as an institution in today's day and age simply represent all the wrong sorts of things: classism, inequality, etc. Why should one family be given preferential treatment over any other? This, of course, comes at a time of Brexit, austerity cuts. Just today, I was reading a report about how old and disabled people are at risk of losing their vital support for adult social care because of the policies of the current government as well as previous governments. In such an atmosphere, is it fair that royal spending goes up on a yearly basis? To discuss that a bit further, we're joined now by Alex Ruyter, who is the director of the Center for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University. He's joining us now from Birmingham via Skype. Alex, thanks for joining us. Alex, what are your thoughts about this? There are certainly arguments both ways, but does it make sense in today's day and age, in 2019, in an atmosphere of Brexit, et cetera, to have the royals spending so much taxpayer money?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I mean, personally, I have no particular regard for the monarchy, and I prefer a republic. But I think, we have to put it in the scheme of things. How much does the monarchy actually cost Britain? If you do the maths, you find that per person in this country, it works to about £1.25 a person. So if we spoke about getting rid of the monarchy, and for which I don't see any evidence that a majority of Britons would support that at this point in time, would that necessarily make people better off? No. I mean, we have to weigh that against the fact that if you didn't have a hereditary head of state, you'd still have an elected president or some such. You would still require a stately residence to live in. So the likelihood is that things like Buckingham Palace would still need state upkeep. Against that, if we want to talk about tackling austerity, and there are serious issues there, as you highlight, I think you'd be far more effective as a would-be government to close corporate tax loopholes, which could easily net something in the order of £100 billion. Compared to that, the cost of the royals is a drop in the ocean.
So then, what do you think it is about the British royal, Alex, which Britons are so sensitive about any criticism of them? Because, it was interesting, actually, for today's show, we had a very hard time finding people who would be willing to even talk about it on air. Why is there such sensitivity around this topic, do you think?
Well, I think the monarchy, for all its sins, is seen by many in the UK as a beacon of stability. And if you consider that against the current Brexit turmoil, especially so, I mean, the reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth, has been in that hot seat now for 65 years. I mean, that really is a beacon of stability. She was there shortly after the end of the Second World War, saw the UK through the Suez Crisis, and actually, compared to the eccentricities of her husband and her children, it has been a paragon of stability. And I think a lot of people in this country still resonate with that. They see her as a person of some dignity who has managed to stay above the political fray.
But then, obviously, as you mentioned there, not just when it comes to austerity, but just the kind of message that it sends to the world as well? Because it's kind of confusing, isn't it? Where the UK would claim that, listen, we stand for human rights, we stand for democracy, et cetera, but at the same time, a royal family in the year 2019. That's sort of a mixed message, isn't it, to the world?
Well, like I said, my own personal preference is for a republic. I mean, the notion of a hereditary head of state in this day and age to me seems an anachronism. But, you've pointed out that the monarchy can be argued to bring tourism benefits to the UK. I think, one study suggests in the order of 2.8 billion. And I suppose the other point to bear in mind is simply being a monarchy, or rather being a republic, doesn't rule out inequality. We only have to look at the US, where levels of inequality are on a par with Britain, if not more so.
A good point, but then I imagine that just the message that it sends, that preferential treatment for a family that you're born into is a global crisis, isn't it? And especially, when it comes to any monarchy anywhere in the world, that's that much more in the spotlight, isn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, certainly they have a high profile for all sorts of reasons, but then like I said, my own personal preference is for a republic, and I think I can appreciate people who would say that the monarchy does seem an extravagance, but they fulfil that function in terms of the Queen being head of state. If you had a republic with a president, you would still be giving them a lavish, stately lifestyle. You wouldn't have the same retinue with the extended family, I suppose, but on balance, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Okay, so let's talk about stability then going forward when it's to Brexit. What do you think the role of the monarchy will continue to be going into, the next stages for the UK? Because, obviously the Queen has also asked for some sort of stability really when it comes to the Brexit process, I believe. Do you think that she has any influence over that process, or is she completely separate from the political decision-making? Obviously, on a day-to-day basis, we know that she is separate from that, but does she have influence over that process? Should she have influence over that process if she is such a stabilizing factor in the country?
I think to the extent that she would exert any influence, she's been rather discreet about it, as, for example, reported comments praising the role of international institutions during the recent state visit of US President Donald Trump, for example. In terms of the relationship between Queen and Parliament, in theory, the Queen could be asked by a would-be Prime Minister to prorogue Parliament, in other words, to suspend it in order to pursue some political agenda of the government. I think she'd be extremely reluctant to have to engage in that way, and could well point out that Parliament could enact a motion preventing itself from being prorogued. So the actual ability of the Queen to intervene directly is somewhat limited. Of course, when you open a session of Parliament, she could well use the Queen's speech to highlight things that may be of concern to her if we come to a next session of Parliament after October, maybe. But I think the direct room for manoeuvre is very limited.
And then if I may for a moment look across Europe, because certainly it's not just that the UK royal family which survives obviously into the modern day and age, but you can talk about Spain and others as well. Why do you think that these families have this longevity at this time? Do you think they adapted well to contemporary democracies?
Yes, I think they have. I mean, if you look at the royal family today with Meghan Markle, the first member of the royal family from a sort of minority ethnic background, so that, the cynics could well say they've embraced diversity in that sense, but, they have shown themselves capable of adapting. But I think, the continued appeal of the monarchy, and particularly the British monarchy, lies in its awe and its mystique, the almost fairy tale quality that even people in very humble situations cannot but help find fascinating. And don't underestimate the power of that.
All right, Alex, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, you're taking your time out to share your thoughts with us on this topic. That was Alex de Ruyter, Director of the Center for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University. He was speaking to us from Birmingham via Skype. Now, as I said, viewers, there are arguments both pro and anti, of course. There is a Republic Party as well, which speaks quite strongly against the monarchy and the continuation of that institution as it currently stands and all it represents: inequality, preferential treatment for just chance of birth, really, and living off of the taxpayers' money. But then, of course, on the other hand, there is the argument that, listen, it actually just costs each individual Briton £1 or so to keep this family going on a yearly basis, and that they bring in that much more, or several-fold more, I should say. In tourism money, that's at least the argument, and of course there are counter-arguments to all of the above as well. It's an important discussion to have, though, and it seems that the sensitivity around this topic is sort of misplaced. There should be something up for discussion more openly and more often, because certainly it's important about the symbols that this sends, especially in a country with its colonial past and its control still. I mean, the Queen is still the Queen of Australia and Canada and New Zealand and other countries around the world too. Does that make sense in the year 2019? We'll certainly be revisiting this topic if anybody else is willing to discuss it with us here in The Scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.